Hey fans of Masters, this is Nikachu Merfolk Master, and today is Masters Monday, where we go in depth into archetypes of Masters, get really deep knowledge and insight about how the deck works and how it interacts with the format. And if you want to learn how to play with or against these archetypes, how they really work within Magic the Gathering, you're going to want to like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And this is the best MTG podcast that's not actually a podcast, because you can't find me on SoundCloud or any of those other platforms. I'm just a YouTube channel. Now, today's special guest, he is a master of Tron. Now, Tron, definitely one of the most dangerous decks ever in the history of Modern. He has won many events, top aided, went super deep in many GPs, SCG events. I'd love to thank very much our special guest this week, Joe Lossett. Thank you very much for coming on to the show.
Dude, I'm happy to be here. I'm excited about this. This is a deck that I have a lot of experience with and a lot of knowledge, and it's cool to share it.
That's awesome. And you know, I think most people know you for your mastery of Miracles in Legacy, but much less known, I think, is your mastery of Tron in Modern. But I have seen over the years, like as far back as 2016, you have been putting up consistent results with Tron at a very high competitive level. Let us know what those results are and why you're a master of Tron.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I'd phrase myself as a master, but maybe I qualify. Yeah, as far as the comparison to Miracles, even though I played Miracles for so long, I've qualified for the Pro Tour twice with each deck. So in that respect, they're kind of even.
Yeah.
But, I actually went back and looked, getting ready for this interview, through kind of my history with the deck, and the first result I found that was relevant was back in 2015. Was Star City Invitational. I top aided, and those are split format, and I played Modern as the. I mean, I played Tron as the Modern segment, and made top eight of that. Back, seems like a long time ago now. I don't really remember it all that well. And then going forward over the next few years, there was I got second in an Open in Milwaukee, where I regrettably, I feel fairly confident saying I threw it away in the finals. I did top 8 Grand Prix. My first Grand Prix top 8 was with Tron, which kind of seems wrong because it feels like it should have been with Miracles, but it wasn't. I did the Players Championship I won for Star City. I was playing Tron as my Modern deck. And then I did qualify from another Grand Prix going 13-2, but not making top 8. And then this last year, 2019, I had a couple near misses in PTQs, still playing the deck fairly regularly. So it's been over a span of years, and really with different versions of the deck.
Right, so you know how to adapt it to the metagame as the metagame changes in Modern.
Yeah, I feel like I do. And I feel like that's kind of one of the things that kept me interested in it for a long time, was even though, I mean, Tron is basically stock, however many cards never change. There are flex slots in the main, and as well as the sideboard, that they really do change over time. And even the color, the splash color, obviously green is always the focus of the deck, but the splash color has changed over time in response to what else is going on in the format, and that's something that the evolution of that has been something I'm very interested in. Yeah.
Or removing the splash color to hedge
yourself
against Blood Moon.
Really, yeah, I mean, that's really the kind of the same, whether you're splashing or not, or what color you're splashing. It's all, you're making a choice with, even if you're just playing mono green, you're still choosing not to splash, since the previous versions, when I started playing the deck back in 2015, I guess. Yeah. The green red build had existed for a number of years.
It was the stock list.
Yeah, it was the stock list, and I don't think it was changing overly much year to year. That might be wrong. I don't know, because I wasn't following the deck all that closely at the time. When I started playing it, there was a pretty accepted list, and that then went on for a while until, and I basically played that and changed a few things, but then kind of once you're playing the deck yourself, then you're more aware of the intricacies and then what changes, what a subtle change in the deck list. Whereas if you're playing it and I just see your results from 2 separate months, I may not even notice. But if I'm playing it myself, obviously it's a significant thing, and I'm well aware of it.
Right. All right, so let's move into, why play Tron? What is the core reasons for why we would want to play Tron?
So, I think I can break this down for you pretty succinctly. Why play Tron? Because big planeswalkers are really cool.
Okay.
That is the actual reason. The deck has gone up and down in how good it is versus the metagame over the years. But playing Karn and Ugin is awesome. They're so great, and they just blow the crap out of whatever your opponent has, and it's.
So it maxes out on the fun factor.
The setup phase of playing the deck, maybe not so much. It's pretty repetitive, but activating Karn, activating Ugin, I don't really get tired of that.
You know what? That was not the answer I was expecting, but I totally respect it. You gotta like the deck that you play.
Yeah, I made notes for this interview and for your questions that you sent me ahead of time. And for why play Tron, I have 2 things written down. Planeswalkers are cool, and big planeswalkers are cooler. Okay. That is what I wrote down.
The only deck that can maximize on these two things.
Yeah. Some other decks are like trying to play, maybe so over the years, like maybe Eldrazi Tron has like 2 big Karns or new big Ugin, but whatever. We're playing play sets of big Karn and now little Karn, and it's just great.
That's awesome.
Why would you not want to do this?
Exactly, and I think a lot of people have taken that perspective as well. You know what? Tron, for the most part, has been seen as a control deck, but some people also look at it like it is potentially some sort of combo deck. What is your definitive opinion about what role Tron takes in Modern?
Well, I don't know if my opinion is the definitive one, but I feel like it's more like a combo deck.
Okay, that is interesting. That is definitely a little bit against the grain. Let us explain explain to us why.
If those are the options, if the options are aggro, control, and combo, I think I would choose combo. I've seen some descriptions of archetypes include ramp as a strategy, in which case Tron would fall into that. But really, we have a good chunk, a third of our deck are cards trying to enable the Urza Tron mana base. They don't. If we were ritualing out Karn Liberated, people would probably call it a combo deck.
Right.
But our rituals just cast the turn before. Like Sylvan Scrying doesn't generate any mana realistically on the turn you cast it on turn 2, but it generates multiple mana on turn 3. So really, we're still ritualing things out. We're just doing it preemptively. And since that's unusual, it kind of the whole deck escapes the normal criteria of falling into one category. But we have a whole ton of cards. Really, the deck is lands, cards to assemble your mana base even stronger, and then payoffs.
Yeah.
And that sounds like more like a combo deck to me.
That's very interesting. And that's coming from someone who basically plays, you cut your teeth on a control deck in Legacy. And I thought, Tron might be because it is another sort of control deck, but hearing this from you, that's a very good explanation about why an argument to make that Tron is a combo deck.
Yeah, and I think it's important to realize that that's an argument because you could very definitely argue the other side.
Of course.
But this is the side that I would go with, yeah.
All right. So, what do you think are the strengths of Tron? And how does that convert into good matchups?
So I'd say the primary strength are over the years, or against mid-range decks. Jund being maybe the best example, where what your opponent's playing Tarmogoyf, Bloodbraid Elf, and mixed in with some removal and discard. Well, to start with, the removal is not very good. Any deck that's gotten, there's very few decks that are going to have 0 removal, but most decks will have 1 set. Path to Exile, Fatal Lightning Bolt, whatever. They're going to have 1 set of removal. Any deck that pushes beyond that like Jun, for example, that's going to have more than one set of removal,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to be gaining an advantage against because you're just not playing cards that those are good against. So the mid-range kind of archetype, Merfolk, just anything where there's like a number of creatures and some removal. What would other examples be? Maybe the Collected Company value decks. There's recently I played against Slivers, but just decks that are trying to go wide or they're trying to get to the mid game and have creatures backed up by removal. That's not going to work too well for them. Also, a strength of the deck is that we're pretty good against discard spells.
Oh yeah,
and that pays off in a big way again against a lot of mid-range decks, because once the mana is assembled, like the discard has to come really early, and it's kind of it's tough for the playing against Tron. If you have a turn 1 Thoughtseize, do you take the mana enabling spell like Sylvan Scrying, or you take the payoff?
Mm-hmm.
And you should be taking the mana fixing most of the time. But even so, like once you get the mana assembled, you can strip the threats out of my hand. But then the deck is going to top deck incredibly well, because it's not like I'm top decking. If you have Tarmogoyf in play, it's not like I'm drawing to a Fatal Push to kill it. I'm drawing to a Karn to kill you.
Right.
And that's probably where Tron, I would say, generates more hatred than the average deck.
Oh, absolutely. I pulled like modern players. The two things that push modern players to Pioneer were Mox Opal and Tron. Those were the two main things that pushed them away from modern to this other format.
And I don't even think that's really a legitimate gripe, but that's the way things go. I'm not surprised by that. I understand that, even though I don't think it's legitimate. But the deck top decks extremely well once the mana is assembled, and your general whatever payoff you draw just crushes the opposing board, which is why you're so strong against mid-range. Ugin's going to clean up. You could have any number of elves on the board. One Ugin's going to get all of them, and not only that, it's going to get all of the ones you draw for the rest of the game.
Yep.
Because you can't top deck too well against Tron's threats, which is also irritating from the other side.
How do you compete with Ugin?
So yes, huh?
Yeah, how do you compete with Ugin?
Yeah, you really don't. At least for many of the years I played. Now there's a few ways, but even still, they're not good. But at least there's something. So yeah, strengths of the deck. You're good against mid-range decks, and you are pretty good at shrugging off discard spells. I would say those are the two things that really power a lot of the success of the deck.
Right. And just to reiterate, you recommend people attack the mana enablers, because once you have the mana in play, you're just going to top deck better than the opponent in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. You can to make it as simple as possible. Like if you Thoughtseize my Karn, I can draw another Karn. If you Thoughtseize the Sylvan Scrying and leave me with Karn, it's sure I can draw another Sylvan Scrying, but still, if I draw the Scrying, it takes me another turn then to set up the Karn, because I have to play the Scrying first. So you can't as easily just top deck into an immediate destroying of your opponent. Whereas if you take the payoff, then if I just draw another payoff, you're just immediately wiped out.
Right, yeah. So, what are the deck's weaknesses then, and how does that translate to like bad matchups?
Well, just to put it broadly, decks that don't put material on the board are more problematic, because in that case, Oblivion Stone, Ugin, our defensive measures for the most part, especially in the main deck, are defending against what's on the board.
Okay.
So whatever your pressure you're presenting is generated by cards in hand, that is much harder for Tron to deal with. Like we're not totally helpless, because Karn Liberated and now Karn Great Creator can disrupt the hand somewhat, but in general, if you're playing to the board, that's going to favor the Tron side. And then there are multiple ways to really what you want to be attacking is the mana in Tron.
Mm-hmm.
So any deck that's running Field of Ruin, Damping Sphere, those kinds of things after more after sideboarding, that's it's an effective way to combat Tron. And one reason why Tron I feel like has gotten weaker in the last 6 months or so is that players have finally started adapting, playing numerous copies of Damping Sphere.
Okay.
And any deck can play it because it's colorless.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, that is more against land destruction. The Tron deck can retutor for whatever Tron piece was destroyed and then just keep going. But you can run things that deal with Damping Sphere, but you can't tutor, like I can't tutor for Nature's Claim.
Right.
So it's harder to dig out of that. And then combo decks in general, like the faster the combo deck is, the more of a problem it can be. Storm, I think, is okay. It's not great, but it's okay. Amulet Titan is very frightening. I would say that was maybe the worst. It was the matchup I didn't want to face.
Mm-hmm.
Over the last.
I think there's a lot of people feeling that right now.
Yeah, and Amulet Titan has actually changed, and we'll get to that later on when we talk about. You want to talk about like what could bring Tron back into the metagame, but I think Amulet Titan at the time, like not this the new Amulet-less versions, but the Amulet Vigor and Azusa into Primeval Titan into Haste Kill You, was tough. Tron is definitely not favored there. And then there's some fringy decks, Goryo's Vengeance, Through the Breach stuff, which you don't see too often, which is good because Tron gets pancaked by it. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, decks where they're not really putting material on the board turn after turn. They're playing out of their hand.
Right.
And that's what Tron does not want to see.
Okay, so I want to touch on something you said earlier about Damping Sphere being in high numbers, probably because of Amulet Titan, and that's affecting Tron. But there has been quite a bit of debate I've seen over the years about Blood Moon and Damping Sphere, and how it interacts with Tron, but it may not be enough because Tron still can make their land drops. If Damping Sphere and Blood Moon aren't backed up by a good clock, you just make your land drops anyway. You can still, search for forests with Expedition Map to get around Blood Moon, and still cast things like turn 3 Oblivion Stone, turn 5 Crack It. Give us your take about how good are these cards?
So I would say Blood Moon, going back a few years when it was much more commonly played, was not a very effective card against Tron. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you lose games to it. That's going to be true of anything. But yeah, Nature's Claim picks it off. Oblivion Stone picks it off. But also, it costs 3 mana, and that's the point where you're investing 3 mana in something, and that's like a real turn.
Yeah.
That's you want to be. You're not pressuring me too much if your turn 3 is Blood Moon. Mm-hmm. Whereas Damping Sphere being a full mana cheaper, it's not as much of an investment for the opponent. Mm-hmm. And so they can play a more sizable threat and develop faster, maybe.
Also, it gets in play before on the draw before you get Tron on the play.
Yes, yeah, and I mentioned that and I slipped out of my head. But yes, you can have Blood Moon in your hand to play on turn 3, and if I go first, there's a decent chance you're not going to get there, or it's going to be too late. Whereas Damping Sphere, that's not the case because in no scenario is Tron ever going to deploy a threat on turn 2. Mm-hmm. So Damping Sphere, you're guaranteed, even going second, to always be able to get it on the board fast enough, and that makes a huge difference. But yeah, the cards themselves are not. It's really what you're buying time for, and Blood Moon taking more mana. It does nowadays. A lot of things have changed in the last year, but now with Blast Zone. Blast Zone is a way to deal with Damping Sphere, whereas it can't deal with Blood Moon. Mm-hmm. So things have changed somewhat on that, but still, Damping Sphere is just a scarier card because it comes out. I suppose because it comes out a turn earlier. Also, you just see it more often. Blood Moon restricted to decks playing red. Damping Sphere, anybody can play it.
Right.
and so you run into it more often, and it is a problem. It's definitely a problem. And in the last year, when a lot of decks started going up to 3 copies or even 4, some of the one generation of the Urza decks had played 4 Damping Spheres, and that's just at that point they're going to have it consistently, and that's a real problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally see it. So Blood Moon, maybe not a big deal, but Damping Sphere in big numbers, especially to beat the Amulet Titan deck right now. Although I don't know how scared they really are of this card, but at the very least, the Tron decks have got hit by splash damage.
So I guess we'll hit this now. This actually, I feel like one of the questions you had said to have to keep in mind was what could change to bring Tron back into the metagame, because right now it doesn't exist. Tron, like if you were preparing for a modern tournament right now and you spent any number of seconds considering classic Tron, you're wasting those seconds because the deck just is not there. But now that the Amulet-less Titan decks are showing up in high number, and it's a very strong deck, but Damping Sphere is not good against it. Because they're not using nearly as many of the 2-mana lands, and their kill is with Fill the Dead, which isn't affected by that at all.
Right.
So control decks are cutting Damping Spheres for the new Ashiok that prevents searching the deck. And that's very significant because, one, it costs 3 mana. So again, we're back to if you're going first, you can get around it, potentially, if you're playing Tron. And 2, even if you're going first and you have your Ashiok on turn 3, if I play Sylvan Scrying on turn 2, your Ashiok to prevent me from searching my deck on turn 3, I don't care. I already did all the searching. Because with Tron, your searching happens early in the game, whereas with the Amulet-less deck, it happens later in the game.
Yeah.
So, looking at sideboards, just in general, like looking at league results, we're seeing Damping Sphere numbers are dropping for Ashioks, and that kind of paves the way for Tron to potentially come back. Whereas, if you would have, even 2 weeks ago, if we had done this interview 2 weeks ago, I would have said Tron is done. Now, because of this very rapid rise of Amulet-less Titan, that's not easy to say, the Amulet-less decks, I think there is actually hope for Tron to come back and be relevant, maybe even immediately.
So you think Tron dropped off purely from Damping Sphere alone? That one card?
No, not entirely. Oko didn't help either.
Well, tell us about it.
So, Oko doesn't seem like it should impact Tron, just on the face of it, because it's a Planeswalker, it generates value. Tron doesn't care about whatever value you're getting. We just play something that's huge and destroy you. But Oko is excellent because of the way it works. Like Wormcoil Engine, for example, is not a relevant card. I'm investing 6 mana in a creature, even if it's only costing me 3 lands. But then you can counterback by also investing 3 lands into an Oko that wipes out the Wormcoil Engine for the most part.
Right.
Also, I can't leave things on the board. I can't leave Oblivion Stone on the board. I can't play it preemptively because you can just turn into an Alka and it's worthless.
So you have to wait for you to have 8 mana.
Yeah, so you have to wait for you to have 8 mana, which sometimes is only turn 4. But I think Oko makes Tron rely more heavily on its Planeswalkers. And that's fine because you can win a lot of games off your Planeswalkers, but it's nice to have the other options of just playing a Wormcoil and smashing, and that's not really reliable against Oko. So, it definitely has made a difference. And then occasionally, not every deck playing Oko has acceleration in it, but the ones that do, like Noble Hierarch or Gildegoose, they can go first and play Oko on turn 2 and just elk your Expedition map, and that's really a problem.
Yeah.
You're not
stacking the mana.
You're not used to having to deal with that. Things getting on board that quickly is really tough. Now, there's maybe a counter argument to that, which would be turn 2 Oko going first is good against everything.
Yeah.
So the fact that Tron can't beat it doesn't matter because no one else can either.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of, that helps for feeling good after you've lost, but it doesn't help the fact that you're still losing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm more optimistic now than I have been in months about Tron's future. But there's still issues to be dealt with. Oko's a nuisance, and I mean decks in general. Like Modern is, I wouldn't say right now the decks are overly powerful, even though it seems like they might be. Like the Urza in general is not, I don't think, a very frightening card for Tron.
Mm-hmm.
It plays to the board. It generates a token that can attack for some damage, but really we don't care that much about that. And then
Right.
what are you doing on your turn? You're investing a bunch of mana to take a card randomly out of your deck and put it into play. So again, we're putting something into play, and you're spending a lot of mana to do it. And then I can spend a lot of mana and just wipe everything out all at once, because I don't care if you're building up a wide board. That's not what Tron is worried about. So in some respects, I feel like Tron could do well against the current metagame. But we'll see. I mean, it's going to be. I'm interested whether a Tron deck from 6 months ago, which would have been of no value in the last 6 months, might be able to just drop in right now and immediately play with the same list and expect to do reasonably well. I don't know if that's true because I haven't tried it yet, but I'm curious.
Yeah. Is there any other problems that Tron faces aside from Damping Sphere and Oko?
I mean, there were before, but then like Field of Ruin plus Surgical Extraction out of sideboard from control deck save. That was a nuisance, and it was an easy way to get blown out. But control hasn't been good modern for quite.
Yeah, surgical sort
control
of.
Control hasn't been good in modern for quite some time, and Field of Ruin isn't as good in modern right now, because there aren't, like against Titan decks, Field of Ruin isn't that great because they don't care what land you kill, they're just putting a bunch of mana into play, and there isn't Tron, so Field of Ruin really isn't that great. It would take some work.
Play a lot of basics.
Yeah, so it would take some work, I think, to really investigate how Tron would feel in this current metagame. That's not something I've been thinking about because I haven't been playing Tron in a couple months. Storm looks like it's pretty good right now. That's not a matchup that's great for Tron either. It would really, but that's a deck that you can at least, if you use your flex spots against it, you can maybe break even, which is acceptable if you're beating other things. But I think there's definitely work to be done. I've really found, and one thing that's really drawn me or kept me involved in the deck over several years is that if you put work in, you can solve a lot of the problems that don't seem like there's good answers to. Going back, my timeline's gonna be shaky here, but I'm gonna guess a year and a half when Crackling Ironworks was busting up Modern.
Yep.
And people were asking for it to be banned, and it eventually was. And yeah, that's a deck where I felt like, oh, well, this is pretty hopeless for Tron. It's a combo deck. It's fast. It puts stuff on the board, but then it just kills you, and they can recover their board. And I don't know what to do here. And then, if you sit down and I think a lot of players don't do this, not necessarily because they're not capable of it, because they're just not open-minded enough to realize that it's worth putting time into, or they don't know how to approach it. But if I sat down really playing against Ironworks, put a lot of thought into how the games were going, think about why I'm actually losing and what is actually important, and then without really changing much of the sideboard, I had to change my graveyard hate to show how random that doesn't seem like it would, be what you would focus on. And by changing my graveyard hate and then realizing what's important, I feel like Ironworks went from a fairly bad matchup to nearly a bye, and the matchup that I was hoping to play against every round. And things like that now that's not always there. It's not always possible that something like that can happen. But sometimes it's out there, and I do feel like things like that are what drive innovation in the Tron deck list over the years, more so than cards being printed that Tron uses. It's cards being printed that other decks use, and which forces a change. And to go very long-winded into this if you want me.
It's all good.
The evolution of the splash colors in Tron has really never been based on what cards Tron could splash to make Tron better. It's what other decks were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So originally we had green, red Tron, and then all the Eldrazi came out, and I don't remember what set it was. And we had Eldrazi Temple paired with Eye of Ugin, and then Thought on Seer, Reality Smasher. Cool. What is your Fire Spout Pyroclasm exactly doing?
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything. So, looking for all... Okay, well, we have to do something. If we're going to keep playing Tron, and, well, of course we are, because Karn is awesome. We covered this already. We have to change. And so that's how Green-White Tron developed, because you needed Path to Exile to be able to deal with the Eldrazi, because Red couldn't do it. Then, the entire metagame is still struggling overall, and Eldrazi is just crushing. So then Wizards acts and kind of nerfs the deck, and so then Tron goes back to playing red, because, again, you don't need the white, so you can go back to playing red. Then we have the scenario where we're kind of shifting from Fire Spout being useful to decks like Infect are becoming very strong. Well, is Fire Spout great against Infect? Not really. And so that was where I then started playing Lightning Bolts, because we needed things that were cheap and ideally instant, and I didn't need to kill 3 creatures with 1 card. I needed to kill 1 creature with 1 card just to keep myself alive.
Right.
And we can die so quickly. And so then we have Lightning Bolts, and that was where my top 8 came from, was with playing with Lightning Bolts in Tron during that time period. Then things skew even more towards cheap interaction, because we have Burn. Burn, and in fact, really, for a while, the decks that I felt as a Tron player that I was scared of.
Mm-hmm.
The other stuff I mentioned that were scary, like Gorya's Vengeance, that's never been popular. It's just something to keep in the back of your mind. But the scary decks were Burn and Infect. And then Collective Brutality got printed. It's like, well, this card is tremendous against both of these. And it really takes something into account with Tron, which is that very often your first haymaker is enough to win the game, or take control or stabilize.
Yeah.
I don't need Karn plus Ugin. I just need one of them. And Collective Brutality uniquely allows me to use the extra card. But I have actually to spend. I don't have to spend 8 mana on the Ugin. I can play it for free and trade it for as a duress on the kind of the kicker on Collective Brutality. And so that winter, when I won the Players Championship, I was playing Tron, and that was, I think, the first time that Green Black Tron had shown up, and with 4 Collective Brutality main deck to deal with specifically Burn and Infect, neither of which I played against in the event, but even so,
you had it.
Tron is still Tron. It's still good.
Yeah.
Then Field of Ruin gets printed, and then all of a sudden, overnight, your number of basic lands in your deck is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since then, there's been no splash at all, which is kind of sad, I feel like, because it's interesting to try and figure out what splashes, what cards were right for the different metagames. Now you really just don't play any. You just play because you need basics and you need forests for the Field of Ruins and Assassin's Trophies now that are coming in and hitting. Like Assassin's Trophy, that's a survivable card, so it's Field of Ruin. But not if you're not getting anything in return for it. You have to be getting those lands.
Right.
And then I feel like the most recent, or at least for me personally, in the last year, was realizing Veil of Summer got printed.
Mm-hmm.
And then that meant I no longer need the top of the curve, the Ulamogs, the cast triggers. Really, is the creatures with cast triggers that allowed you to, kind of play up against control decks. Because even if they counter your creatures, you're still getting something out of it. Well, now we have Veil of Summer, so we can handle the control decks anyway without needing the cast triggers. Mm-hmm. And that led to when I started working on this, I didn't realize what the conclusion was going to be. But it ended up being reducing the land count because you don't need the 10 drops anymore.
Yeah, I
And
saw
this actually happened.
your latest list went like down to 17?
17, yeah.
Yeah.
17 land. And so, yeah, whereas if the stock list when I started playing the deck had 20. And then it went down to stepped down to 19 after Ayavugan got banned, and then now down to 17, and which seemed, not reasonable. Like, you can't play 17 land. That's crazy. The Delver decks are playing more than that, but you don't need them. If you're not playing the 10 drops, then you don't need them. So I actually left out a very important factor that happened at the same time as kind of the Veil of Summer changes were happening at the same time as the London Mulligan.
Right.
And that drastically changed how the deck could play. And Tron is always a deck that's mulliganed more so than the average deck in the format.
Of course.
And now with London Mulligan, we're mulliganing even more often. So in the past where we end up with, let's say we have, Tron on turn 3, and then if we have 2 extra cards in our hand, if it's another Tron land and a huge drop, a 10 drop, then we can play it on turn 4 or 5. That's great. Mm-hmm. Well, now that we only have 5 cards in hand, we may still have our 7 drop on turn 3, but we don't have any more cards in hand because we mulled to 5.
Mm-hmm.
So then the 4th land drop and the second big payoff just aren't in our hand. And so we don't need, one thing, we don't want the super expensive cards because we're not going to have the land to support them. And we're not going to just have the card size in general. So the deck kind of changed again. And it was just, we went from being, okay, yeah, we want to have Tron on turn 3 to, okay, we want to have Tron on turn 3 or we're not keeping our hand. And so your overall starting hand size decreased. And so having the extra payoffs just didn't matter anymore because you couldn't cast them anyway.
Right, okay.
And so, so now we'll cut down to 17 land. Because when we cut the Ulamogs, well then Sanctum of Ugin doesn't matter anymore. We can't tutor for the Ulamog that's not in our deck, so let's just cut it.
So that explains the removal of Sanctum of Ugin in your lists.
Yeah, the removal of Sanctum. Sanctum went out when the Ulamogs went out. And then at some point, it wasn't just me. Some other people, I think, became really aware at the same time that Ghost Quarter kind of stunk now because there weren't. Infect was not popular anymore, so Blinkmoth or Inkmoth Nexus didn't matter, and Ghost Quarter against Tron really isn't that good in the mirror.
Okay,
because you're setting yourself back, giving them access to green mana. Like if they have another Sylvan Scrying in their hand, well then you Ghost Quartering them gains you nothing. It doesn't slow them down because you're giving up one of your turns for one of their turns, and if they're already ahead, then you're not catching up. So then I was like, okay, well we can cut Ghost Quarter too, and then so there we are, we're down to 17.
Oh wow.
Yeah, we went from 19, cut Sanctum, cut Ghost Quarter, now you're at 17. We didn't, all you really want, like in your opening hand, if you think about it like this, if your opening hand is Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, and Ghost Quarter, is that any better than Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant? And just not having the Ghost Quarter? It's not really. It's basically the same.
Right.
So then I actually kept track. I go back and forth on whether I keep track of any of my results on Magic Online over the years. And at this point, I decided I'm going to start keeping track of how often I tutor for Ghost Quarter. And I played 60 matches and tutored for it once.
Oof.
I was like,
Data
maybe
is
I don't
powerful.
need this anymore. Yeah. Let's just get this out of here and replace it with, I don't know, a Dismember or something.
Something more useful.
So yeah, I don't know. That turned out to be kind of just my history of evolution with Tron, or everyone's history of the evolution of Tron. But I really, that's how you get paid off, I think, for playing a deck over a long period of time. It's really fun to see how a deck changes over time, adapting to what else is happening in the format.
This is a really good example of how Tron is a deck that can adapt in a very powerful format like Modern, and how masters like yourself can take advantage of that adaptability.
Yeah, and it makes it may not help you win a game in an individual tournament, but over time, if you're aware of these kind of things, your win rate will go up. Another thing that happened is Current Great Creator got printed.
Yep.
Around the same time as Veil of Summer and the London. So yeah, all kinds of that was a great crazy summer for the spring or whatever it happened for the deck, because Great Creator came in, and all of a sudden we had the option of playing another set of cards, and the result of that was you lost your sideboard. And I thought that was really neat too, to see kind of the evolution of, well, how many wish targets are we going to play?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I started with something like 11, and I ended up with 4, because it's just you still need your other cards. You need your Thrag Tusks and Veil of Summers and whatever else, and Nature's Claims. So there's only so many cards that you can, so much space you can give up to the wish board. And I think that was very fun, figuring out what you need and what is kind of a luxury that's not really helping you.
Is that why Karn the Great Creator didn't stand the test of time in Tron? That just couldn't utilize the wish package enough?
Okay, I'm gonna stop you right there. I don't know what you're talking about. Karn Great Creator. If I was gonna play Tron tomorrow, I would have 4 Karn Great Creators.
All right. So Karn the Great Creator still your weapon of choice. So what are the 4 cards that you'd still consider make Karn the Great Creator worth it for this deck?
So you are definitely going to play Ensnaring Bridge, because that's a very strong defensive option that isn't as useful today as it might have been a year ago, but still, it's good. You're going to have Mycosynth Lattice, because that's just your lock it up on the game. If you're although my actual last tournament game with Tron that I played a couple months ago, I actually suicided with Lattice, unfortunately, because you know how not everyone works this way, so maybe you don't know, but the way I work is I don't really internalize things until they've actually happened. Like, theory only gets you so far.
Oh, I'm totally like that. Every single thing I play around, I totally lost to it in a horrible blunder.
Right. And also, cards with similar effects, or the same effect, if it's a different card, you have to learn the lesson again. So I had previously playing online, and which I like playing a lot online because I can lose all kinds of different ways and then learn from it. I had lost online by going for Mycosynth Lattice when my opponent had Collector, not realizing I was going to lock myself out of the game.
Well, I've definitely been on the winning side of that at least once or twice before.
My last paper event, my last game playing Tron, a similar thing happened where I was going to wish for Mycosynth Lattice, and my opponent had Stony Silence on the board.
Yes.
Now, Stony Silence and Collector Roof have the same effect. However, it's not the same card name. So it didn't occur to me that I was also going to kill myself in this scenario, which is what happened. But anyway, Mycosynth Lattice, you got to have that. Ensnaring Bridge, you got to have that. I believe you need to have one thing to deal with spells, and you can, like, if you're willing to spend more of your sideboard to solve this, then you can have options. I, however, don't think you can. So you basically choose between Chalice of the Void and Trinisphere.
Okay.
I believe. Well, keep in mind this is like 6 weeks, 2 months out of date. I believe Trinisphere was the right choice. But there's arguments for going the other way. But either way, I think you have to play a card like that, and I think you only get to play one.
Okay, because the sideboard is so tight.
Better. Yeah, and then the last one is Local Mellow Coding, because that allows you to, if you're not already behind on the board, and you need to have, so some of the building the wish board, one of the mistakes I made originally was I had too many things that cost 4. And because when you achieve Tron, you have 7 mana. Right. Karn Great Creator, wishing for a 4-drop means you're wishing for something you play next turn. Right. So that I eventually, I think I had 3 things that cost 4 in my initial build. I ended up with none.
All right.
So we want things that we can play the turn that we play Great Creator. And so local mental coding comes into play the turn you cast Great Creator and then locks down a land, which a lot of time that's enough to then buy you the opportunity to untap the next turn and just wipe the game out.
Is that its sole purpose, just to slow the opponent down one more turn before you take over?
Well, so it depends on what you're playing against. Against some deck, like if I'm going first and I play Great Creator coding on turn 3, pass to you, lock a land on your upkeep,
mm-hmm.
and then go back to my turn. If I'm playing against a control deck, if I'm playing against let's say I'm playing against Jund and they didn't manage to get anything on the board yet, I'll just get Lattice and the game's over at that point. If I'm playing against a control deck where the Lattice could get countered, then I'll just stick with the coding and plus Great Creator and use coding to kill your lands one at a time.
Yep.
And so that basically it's not a win condition, but it's very strong continual disruption. And so really that's the two things that coding does. The first part it does either way is slow you down for a turn, but then it's either we use it as land destruction or it already did this job and then we just get Lattice and win the game.
Right.
It also does, some other cute things like being able to shut down planeswalkers instead of playing a Pithing Needle.
Mm-hmm.
We coding by turning the planeswalker into an artifact during the upkeep. So that kind of is nice because Needle's another card that there's some desire to play a Needle effect, but you can kind of anytime you can use your use the sideboard card to solve multiple problems at the same time. Well, that's great. You want to do that, and coding sort of has a few uses. Yeah.
So while we're still on the topic of the sideboard, what are the must-have cards that you needed to have that the Wish package weren't good enough to push out?
Well, so I would say the biggest thing is you have to have a way to kill Damping Sphere.
Okay.
Whatever you want it to be, because you can't do that effectively with an artifact,
mm-hmm.
because Damping Sphere is just not easy to do. I actually searched. I felt very stupid after this, but I searched on online on Gatherer for colorless cards that could deal with enchantments and artifacts, because other colors had devoid cards that that did something.
Yeah, so that's true.
It has to be. There's devoid, bolts, counters, discard spells, land destruction. There's got to be a devoid disenchant, and that would be great because I could Ancient Stirrings for it. Mm-hmm. So I could sideboard it and an Ancient Stirrings for it. So I searched, and because the search was alphabetical, it was the last one. So after a couple pages, I came to the devoid disenchant. Do you know what it is off the top of your head? I didn't. It's Worldbreaker.
Oh yes, of course.
Yes, right. That was
cast it. You get the trigger, destroy whatever you want.
Yeah. So the devoid disenchant is Worldbreaker, which was already in the deck. So good job wasting 5 minutes trying to find that out. But so you have to be able to deal with Damping Sphere. Currently, I believe you have to be able to deal with Collector Oof.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
or it's a few months ago you had to be able to, because that was a card that's definitely irritating. And Collector Oof comes down fast enough to disrupt Expedition Map.
Yep. And all the mana rocks.
Yeah. So I felt like you had to be able to deal with those cards. So you need some kind of disenchant effect to deal with the Damping Sphere. Blaststone gives you the option to do it and out of the main deck, which is nice, but still you gotta have more than that. Nature's Claim is the best. I strongly believe. There are arguments for playing a copy of the Glamour or something else, so that since something doesn't cost 1, so that if Chalice on 1 is on the board, you still have a chance of blowing it up.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to have. I would just say you need to have Nature's Claims, but you need to have some sort of disenchant effects. You need to have some form of life gains to stay even with burn. Whether generally it's going to be more Thrag Tusks, I do think Weather the Storm is playable, and I
Okay.
have had some success with that. But Thragtusks are your mainstay there. As also a medium cost threat that you can rely on that trades with things when against like Jund or mid range decks, for example, when your Tron gets blown up.
Or even Eldrazi Tron.
Yeah, I mean it's excellent there. Also, it trades with everything they have and gains life. So yeah, the most important card is the rest of it can the rest of it's pretty consistently there also, but the disenchant is the most important effect. And then whether you have time to fit in, like, I mean, without having played Tron the last 6 weeks, I would say my sideboard will probably consist of some number of Nature's Claims, some Veil of Summers, because without Ulamongs, you really do need them. And also, they're just excellent against Veil of Summers. Is so good. It's just so good. I can't. In like every format that is legal in, it's great. You need Disenchants, you need Veil of Summers, Thragtusks, and then some form of removal for Collector. Whether it's the two main options are Spatial Contortion and Dismember.
Right. Okay.
And then you generally, some people were dropping Graveyard Hate, but I still think you need some. Now, all of these, depending on how you use your flex spots in your main deck, you may not need these cards in the sideboard. Like if you play a Thragtusk deck, then sideboard. But between your flex spots and the sideboard, you need to have life gain, disenchants, removal for Collector Oof, and the anti-counter magic cards.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the new cards that have come out for Tron. We've already touched on Karn the Great Creator. Let's go a little bit more on Veil of Summer. How big of a game changer was this for the deck? Certainly has been a big game changer for a lot of other archetypes.
Yeah, I think it's huge. It really it's great against blue control, Cryptic Command, any other counters really. It's great against discard, against Jund. It's trades even on mana and your up a card against Duress Thoughtseize, which they're playing plenty of copies of. It's very nice against Death Shadow because that's probably, I would say, the primary deck that plays both discard and counters. So you're good either way. And then it's just it's so nice against, like, I mean, it's rare when it happens, but you can counter Liliana the Veil Ultimate, which is absolutely backbreaking when your opponent's depending on it. It counters, Vendilion Click targeting you to try and disrupt your hand out of a blue deck. It's just,
that's right.
It's such a strong card. It for 1 mana, it does so much. It prevents Assassin's Trophy and Fulminator Mage from killing your lands, which absolutely really it comes in against Jund, Death Shadow, and Control more or less. Control is good, and against the other two decks, it's the best card that you could possibly hope for. Like if you would have said, I'm going to give you a card that will help you against Death Shadow and Jund, you can make up the card. I wouldn't have been brave enough to suggest something as good as Veil of Summer. Because it's so strong. The ability to protect your lands from Fulminator is so relevant, because one of the ways a lot of games is to Fulminator plus Surgical on whatever Tron piece, and they can't do that if they can't use the Fulminator in the first.
Right.
You can still do a Field of Ruin, but that's just, I mean, they're going to draw it so much less often than they will the whole multitude of land destruction spells. So yeah, Veil of Summer was really big printing for the deck. I mean, it changed the format. The whole format had to adapt to it, but it really made a difference for Tron. Just 2019 cards. We had Great Creator, we had Veil of Summer, we had Blast Zone, which really mattered. That became the new go-to main deck card for dealing with troublesome stuff that you could tutor for, which was huge. We had Weather the Storm, which gets played in some sideboards and is reasonably useful.
Mhm.
That feels like for a deck that's existed for, I don't know, a significant number of years, a lot of cards got printed in 2019 that made their way into Tron. Now that I think that statement can be applied to almost every deck because 2019 was just completely nuts on card power. But it certainly applied to Tron as much as any other deck.
How about Once Upon a Time? This was a card that people were on the fence about if it could even be included in Tron. It had some fringe results, but it didn't look like it picked up enough steam. Give us your opinion on this card.
Yeah. Once Upon a Time was a big one that shortly after it came out, now, I don't know the name. I wish I knew the name of the person that wrote this, but I don't. But somebody wrote and posted online the post about how they used like a simulation, and if you replaced your 4 Sylvan Scryings with 4 Once Upon a Times, then your rate of hitting turn 3 Tron increased. Mm-hmm. And that's a pretty stunning result. It's believable. It turned out to be, well, I'm not going to say it's incorrect because, I mean, the math, it was done accurately, but it wasn't done. And so anyway, so that came out, and I think a lot of people read that and were like, whoa, that's startling. And okay, does that mean I've changed my deck? And I saw it too, and I was like, that's pretty nuts if it's true. However, that doesn't take the whole idea of Once Upon a Time. It doesn't take into account real game situations,
right?
Because so if I have a hand that's the problem with adding Once Upon a Time to your deck and any sort of like super the same thing applies to like Gitaxian Probe. If you have 6 cards, if you have a reasonable hand plus Gitaxian Probe, sure, it's fine. If you have 3 cards and 4 Gitaxian Probes, you have no idea what your hand is. So it's very hard to keep that hand. Maybe your hand's great, but you don't know. So if I have let's say I have an opening hand, I have a completely reasonable hand. I'm short a 3rd Tron. Like I have 2 Tron pieces, some payoffs, and let's say a chromatic, and I have Once Upon a Time. Well, so if that Once Upon a Time is the 3rd Tron piece, my hand is great. Whereas if this Once Upon a Time was in the past, let's say the Once Upon a Time was, what were people cutting for to try and fit it in? Like let's say it was, you cut probably one of several different things to fit in 4 Once Upon a Times in your deck list. So let's say in this case it was the Wormcoil Engine. Okay, if I have this hand and then I have the Wormcoil Engine, well, I'm going to, okay, and I'll see how I go in 6. If I have this 7-card hand, instead of Wormcoil, I have Once Upon a Time. So I have my 2 Tron Lens and Once Upon a Time. I'm probably keeping this hand. Mm-hmm. So then if the Once Upon a Time hits the 3rd Tron piece, my hand's tremendous. If it misses, there's a good chance you die. And so the chance of hitting the Tron on turn 3 marginally increased, but the drawback was, in the old version, the drawback was you mulligan. The new version drawback was you die. And that adds up fast.
Right.
You can't just be, it's just too hard to accept that. That was at least my thought process on it. And I did play a number of paper games where I would just like turn a couple cards upside down, like, okay, those are the ones, draw them. Let's see how this works out. And it wasn't impressive. I was not. I didn't fall in love with the card. I didn't feel like it was really helping all that much. And then the inability to, because like whether you replace Sylvan Scrying or Ancient Stirrings or something else to fit in your I'm sorry, when I said Wormcoil Engine before, Sylvan Scrying would have been better,
right,
to illustrate the same point. But I just didn't feel like it helped your Tron enough, or maybe at all. And in the later game, it's not doing anything, because you like comparing to Ancient Stirrings, well, you can hit the Planeswalkers in the middle of the game, which matters. And comparing it to Scrying, you can miss sometimes, and scrying doesn't miss.
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course.
so it being free occasionally, I don't think makes up for what it doesn't give you.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a higher variance strategy on paper that it is not it's not being realized in win rate at all.
Right. But also, just based on what you just said right there, Magic players like to complain about variance, right?
Right, of course.
Happens all the time. So who's signing up for a card that, in theory, increases your variance? Because that's what we're doing. Is that
Right.
what we're after? Are we sitting there with Tron going, man, I really want variance? No, we want the opposite of that. So in decks where in the middle of the game, it's much more reasonable that you can go like turn 4, hardcast once upon a time, hit a 2-drop, play it. That's so much more reasonable than in Tron, where it's like, well, turn 4, hardcast once upon a time, go, and then get crushed. That's yeah, that's not what we're looking for. I don't believe that's what we're looking for. Some
Right.
people did try it. There were some results. You're right. I really, because I think Tron development kind of has gone on hold for the last 2 months. Maybe it would have turned out there was a way to build a deck where Once Upon a Time was very effective. I have my doubts about that, but
Okay.
it's possible. But I really think Tron development has just stopped because the deck has become is left in the metagame.
Right. Right. And this whole thing about Once Upon a Time, mathematically helping the deck find turn 3 Tron is, the math looks great on paper, but in practice is a completely different thing. And I want to now segue into another topic. I'd love to talk about the London Mulligan, because initially Frank Karsten, he did a lot of math. He said, the London Mulligan's going to help Tron the most than any other deck. They're going to find turn 3 Tron. Not only that, they're going to find the answer to your answers against Tron. But then on the Premier Mythic Championship that the London Mulligan debuted, Tron was the worst converter into day 2 than anyone else. And I would love to know your take. Did the London Mulligan actually help Tron?
So yeah, so straight up, yes, I think it did.
Okay.
That first, so there were 2 Pro Tours last year where modern Pro Tours. I played Tron in both of them. The first one that you're referring to, Tron was the most played deck in the tournament.
Yep.
I played 4 constructed rounds at that tournament. All 4 were mirrors. Yeah, and that's I think what a lot of people were going through because it was the most played deck. So I do think that the London Mulligan helps Tron on par more than it does the average deck in the format.
Okay.
But I do think that the deck needed to adapt to the London Mulligan. Not only is that you needed to adjust in your mindset of what's a keepable hand, but also, and that was something that I think everyone's aware of. Like, okay, what your starting hand requirements on 7 have to change because you're going to do better on 6 and 5 than you did in the past with now that we have London Mulligan. But what I think didn't happen right away, because it takes time, it can't happen right away, is that the deck needed to be adjusted.
Okay.
And so, like for me talking about now, I would play 17 land in Tron. 17 compared to 19 is a pretty big difference, and that's in large part due to I mean there are several factors that's due to London Mulligan. And if we go back to that, I don't remember where that Pro Tour was, but I think it was in Europe somewhere. But I don't know my deck list off my head, but I would be willing to bet that I was playing 19 land.
Okay.
And basically everyone else was too, and that we shouldn't have been. So I think that certainly contributes to the deck not having a great win rate, because the deck needed to be like, everyone benefits from London Mulligan right away, but maybe other decks were adapted themselves better, quicker than Tron did. The second Pro Tour, okay, I am dumb, and you did not help me. Where, what? And I said it was somewhere in Europe. Where do you think the Pro Tour was?
Oh, London.
Where we debuted the London. It was probably in London, huh? Yeah.
But I think that was the first Pro Tour, or was that the Hogak? No, I don't think it was the Hogak Pro Tour. It was like the Dredge Pro Tour, basically.
But it was most definitely in London, considering that they named it after London. The second one that was actually won by Tron was at that point, I think the Tron decks were developing. They were on the way. I played 18 land at that one, so I hadn't completely bought into the idea that going to 17 was realistic.
Mm-hmm.
But I was closer. But yeah, I think it just took. I'm gonna say the Tron community, not that we are a big community, but just all the collective Tron players. It took a while to adjust, and then we saw that, and then it won that second Modern Pro Tour. Now, I don't think that Tron deck that won that Pro Tour was built particularly well, but
it was like something from like 3 years ago.
It was still fine, and it won the Pro Tour, so obviously it functioned fairly well. But yeah, so London had a huge impact. It changed the way you play, it changed your opening hand size. I think that's important to realize. Like I talked about earlier, your opening hand size is now just less than it was. You have turn 3 Tron more often, but your payoff, you have to be able to play it. Like if I have one payoff now, it can't be Ulamog because I can't play it on turn 3.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be something you play on turn 3. Now that we have 2 sets of Karn, that's just perfect, because we can play both sets of Karn on turn 3, and that's just ideal.
Mm-hmm.
That's another thing. I feel like if I could go back and talk through that segment from half an hour ago over again, part that I left out because I wasn't thinking it through all the way. Part of the reason to get rid of the Ulamogs is because not just because we don't have the extra cards in our hand, but also we need to be able to play the one threat that we have on. Like our 5-card hand can make Tron and have one threat. That threat needs to be castable.
Right. I see. You only have so many cards in your hand, whether it be 4 or 5 cards, and if you only have 3 lands, then you have to be able to play everything with those 3 lands.
Right. So you can't have Ulamog, you can't have an Emrakul, because you need to play it because you don't have anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have a Karn, you need to have a Thragtusk, a Wormcoil Engine, something that you can play.
Would it be accurate then to say that if you are playing those cards, you shouldn't mulligan as aggressively because you just increase your rate of failure?
You mean the Ulamogs type stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay.
Because I would agree with that, because you need more. You need more total resources to get to 10 mana than you do to 7. So I would be on board with that. You also, if you're going to play with Ulamog, so even if you're unsure on, if you're playing Tron and you're unsure kind of what direction you want to take with all the concepts that are out there. So if you're playing my 17 land version, I agree with the theory behind the 17 land, but I still want to have Ulamog. Well, then you can't just cut 1 card and add Ulamog. You have to cut 2 and add Sanctum also, because you want to be able to tutor for the Ulamog, and you just need to have more land, because you need to. You can't be mulling as hard because you need to be keeping more hands, so you need to be having enough mana and everything to. Wow, that was really well put. You just need to have more of everything. You can't play the 17 lands and play the Ulamog and expect it to. So you can still play the 19 lands, presumably, and play the Ulamog's, and you're fine, just like you were before. But if you're going to strip it down, you really have to strip it down. You can't split the difference, I don't think.
Okay. Okay. Some of the more powerful cards in this deck in Tron that has enabled it over the years, one of them, the most hotly debated, is Ancient Stirrings. How do you feel about Ancient Stirrings? Is this a fair card in Modern?
Is it a fair card in Modern? Yeah, I think it is. I think... I mean, it's an excellent cantrip. It digs further than like the old days. It would impulse. It would look at 4. I mean, we're looking at 5 cards for 1 mana. There's no cantrip that's really ever been better than that. That isn't fixing more than 1 card in your hand. And yeah, I think it is fair because it is limited. You're not because I mean it's great in Tron, but it's limited on what it can do. You can't splash. You can't have it in any deck. Your deck has to be built in a very specific way to take advantage of it, and we see that I think really almost exclusively in Tron and in Hardened Scales Affinity. We don't really see Ancient Stirrings in too many other places. Maybe we see it in Colored Eldrazi, which we don't see all that often, but that'd be another place deck that can play it. But something that annoys me, and I think a lot of people, but I know it annoys me, is when people are losing to a card and they beg for it to be banned.
Right.
Like, oh, Ancient Stirrings, or, well, Tron lands in general, but Ancient Stirrings is too good of a cantrip. You have to ban it. Well, if you work at, like I was talking about earlier, like banning KCI, well, maybe you can just figure out how to beat it. That's not always true, but sometimes you can. Look at the format right now. Did we ban anything from Classic Tron, Hardened Scales Affinity, or Colored Eldrazi? The 3 Ancient Stirrings decks. Did we ban anything from any of those? No.
And they're gone.
Any of the... What's that?
And they're gone.
Yeah. Are any of those decks good right now? No. They're terrible. Ancient Stirrings is hardly even a playable card in Modern. So, do I think it's too good? No, I don't. I think if Ancient Stirrings looked at 10 cards instead of 5, I'm still not sure it would get played right now. I mean, it probably would, but still. But yeah, I think right now we're looking at a card. It's if you had someone who'd only played Modern for the last 2 months, and you said, and you tried to make the argument that Ancient Stirrings should get banned, they would look at you like you're crazy. Because it's just not a card that's even this relevant in the format. If we go back 2 years, yeah, you could make a case for. I wouldn't have bought into it, but I think you can make a case. But no, I do not think it's too good. I think you have to warp your deck considerably in order to take advantage of it. And at that point, I think it's okay. I think cards that are narrower in scope or narrower in usage, it's okay if they're a little bit stronger.
All right, that's good. Now, because you were such a proficient player playing Miracles in Legacy, I was just so curious why you chose Tron in Modern over, say, Blue-White Control.
I don't know if I can help you there. This is a decision that would have been made 5 years ago. I don't.
Right.
Reason was at the time, but I think I know I wasn't really attached to any specific for a while, or at least not any good ones. I had my ones I had fun with, but none that were good. I was like, well, if I want to start playing out of the deck, and I'm gonna try this Tron deck, and I just never really gave up on it. And that's something that that's happened to me a few times where I'm like, well, I should survey the field. I should try out a number of different things. And then the first one I like, I just keep playing. And I don't continue trying out other decks. And so when I started playing Tron, I was like, well, this is really enjoyable, and I'm winning a decent amount, and I like this, and yeah, I'm just going to stop here. And I didn't plan on stopping for 4 years, but that's what happened.
And it turned out to be like a strong tier 1 deck anyway.
Yeah, no, it was good. It's certainly been tier 1 for different times. It's like Miracles, I would say would probably maybe 6 months after I started playing it, Miracles became tier 1 and probably was for the entire rest of the time Top was legal. Tron has been tier 1 and not been tier 1. It's gone back and forth. And I've stuck with it the whole time because I do think there is merit in really knowing how your deck works and having experience with it. I've overdone that in numerous times in my Magic career where I don't abandon decks when I should. But it's tough because it's always like, even when Tron is not at its best, it can beat almost anything with good draws and with good play. And I always go through this where I don't blame the deck. I blame myself for not having the deck built right. So even if it's like a tier 3 deck, I'm thinking to myself, well, that's because of me, not because of the deck. So we need to just work on it more and get it configured right and play it right. And it's
I completely agree. I mean, if the metagame's completely changed and your deck from 3 months ago is not giving you the results that you had 3 months ago, then, you know, maybe that's something in the deck that needs to change.
Right.
You have to adapt to the metagame.
And it's been fun. Like, you know, you get to play with powerful, fun cards. Great Creator got printed. That's a powerful, fun card. I mean, maybe not for everybody, but I enjoyed it. And
not for the Mox Opal players.
No, well, yeah, but screw those people.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to talk about Ancient Stirrings being banned? Make the case for Mox Opal. Now, I wouldn't argue Mox Opal, but I know a ton of people would.
Oh, I'm one of them.
Yeah. Mox Opal has certainly caused some been a nuisance. But Great Creator is super nice in that scenario.
So with that, you know, what is the biggest mistake most people make with Tron?
So the first biggest mistake, if you're not learning from the hive mind, if you're kind of just not like reading about, if you don't study first, by far the biggest mistake is that you don't mulligan enough.
Okay.
And a way to one thing that I actually liked about Tron is because I was a player that just in general in Magic in any format did not mulligan often enough. If you play Tron for a few months, you will get more accustomed to the fact that you can mull to 5 cards still win games. And I think that's an important thing to internalize, to not be afraid of mulligan with any deck. And that's one plus of getting some experience with the deck. I still don't mulligan enough in other formats, but I'm better at it now than I used to be because with Tron, I'm so willing to mulligan now. I wasn't at the beginning, but you get used to it. So I think that's the biggest thing by far is if you don't want, if you're keeping a 7-card hand, you don't want to be in a situation where you're hoping the top card of your deck is anything, because it shouldn't matter. And so really get comfortable with mulling because you don't do it enough. So that's the biggest thing. After you get accustomed to the fact that you can win on 5, so you shouldn't be keeping garbage 7s in the dark. Then cards that people use wrong, I think I've always felt like this with a lot of decks and with lots of cards, that people don't understand the capabilities of their own decks. They don't understand what the deck can do. In minute specific cases. One being, I remember, because maybe let's ballpark a year ago. I don't know when this was.
Sure.
There was a post by a couple of two different Tron players posted something about, oh, I just realized if you have Oblivion Stone and Relic of Progenitus on the board at the same time, that you can activate them in response to each other to blow up everything and then exile everything once it gets to the graveyard. And just to lay it out for people listening that aren't familiar with it. If you activate the second ability in Relic of Progenitus and then in response to it, blow up Oblivion Stone, the Oblivion Stone resolves first, kills everything. Everything goes to the graveyard. Then the Relic's ability resolves, exiling everything in the graveyard. This is something that, yes, definitely matters against like Dredge, Crabbind in those decks. It definitely matters. It definitely comes up. This isn't like a corner case scenario. This is something that happens. And these two people, both, I would say, near the top of the curve in Tron experience, had not realized this. And so as far as what people are missing or what cards you're using wrong, I think that there's going to be different for different people because you're not going to know. Like, you've never do it. It's hard to just realize that.
Right.
And so but Oblivion Stone and Relic are definitely two cards individually, much less together, that some interactions get missed. For example, in the Tron Mirror, if your opponent is blowing up an Oblivion Stone and you also have an Oblivion Stone, you can put a counter on one of your own things and to save whatever it is, because the Oblivion Stones don't care where the fate counters came from. Oblivion Stone putting a fate counter on Phantasmal Image against humans to kill the Phantasmal Image because it's being targeted by something. So, like, Oblivion Stone does more than just what it looks like on initial reading. Relic of Progenitus, a super common thing. We talked about this times. An easy way to lose is from Field of Ruin or in the past Ghost Quarter on your Tron land, followed by Surgical. This happens all the time. And there are Tron players that are boarding out relics against decks that might have this. Like in the Mirror, there was a time period where Tron decks had Surgicals on the board and they could tutor for the Ghost Quarter and then try and win the game by, well, effectively, or at least put themselves in a very strong position. And so you have to realize, as the other Tron player, that you have to leave your relics in for the Mirror only because they counter surgical extractions from the opponent on your Tron lands.
Right.
And so there are just, there's those two cards, Oblivion Stone and Relic, I feel like are very easy to miss kind of defensive interactions that aren't obvious. This is a huge one. And it's come up in conversation or at events where people are watching a handful of times over the years. Even against, in mirrors against very experienced Tron players. Karn Liberated Ultimate. People don't seem to use this ability very often. And it's great. Because every time I do it, people sitting around me and my opponent are like, wow, I've never actually seen that happen. I played against Tron 100 times. I've never seen anyone do it. Why not? It's so strong. I would say, the matchup by far when it comes up the most is against Burn. Because you get to a situation where you've plus Karn a couple times on their hand, so they have no cards, and let's say you're at 2. Well, so Karn goes to 14, and then you're, Karn is at 14, and you're at 2, and they have no hand. Well, if you kill a land, let's say they have 3 land to play. If you kill a land, okay, now Riftbolt can't kill you, but Lava Spike can, or Boros Charm can. So you
don't like your odds.
You flip a coin on them not drawing a burn, or do you restart the game? Well, the answer is you restart the game. And against Burn, I would say, I'm going to guess that in the entire time of my playing Tron against Burn, I'm going to say you Karn Liberated Ultimate to restart the game 10% of the time. 10% of games. And from people I've talked to, it sounds like, from their experience, it's 0%. It never happens. But it's such a useful tool. It's it's very hard to beat. I've only lost once ever. And so then so as far as misusing Karn Liberated, because if you have in your mind that Karn Ultimate Restart is strong, a way to make it stronger is to plus on yourself. Because if you have an extra Karn Liberated, would be the easiest example. Do I need this extra Karn? No. But is restarting with Karn Liberated in play pretty darn good? Yes, it is. So
we're going deep here. We're going super deep.
When you play deck for a few years, though, this is where you get to. If you have extra, if you draw a Sylvan Scrying and you already have Tron and Karn against any matchup, really, you can Sylvan Scrying and then play a duplicate Tron land, or you can Sylvan Scrying and then plus the Karn on yourself to exile the Tron land from your hand, because now have that Tron land when you restart the game. It's a lot of cards in Tron. Tron is not like, a lot of people say Tron is, it's so easy. It's not a hard deck to play. I will grant that playing Tron in game is not as challenging as some other decks. I think it's not as hard as I think it's harder than people give it credit for, but I think that statement applies to everything.
Sure.
But there are lots of little things that do add up that are very cool, like Relic, Oblivion Stone in combo, or Carney yourself, or I don't know, relicking your own graveyard to counter surgical. Lots of these things matter over time, because if you play it for a long time, they'll come up numerous times and you'll see how strong. But yeah, definitely Karn gets a bad rap. Tron gets a bad rap for being so easy to play. I do think that it's definitely a deck where the harder parts are sideboarding and mulligans as opposed to in-game playing. But I don't feel like that makes it easy, and that doesn't mean that there aren't lots of little intricacies to discover and to keep in mind.
Right. So with that, what do you think is the most misplayed card in the Tron deck? If it wasn't already mentioned.
Yeah, I'm sure. It's probably just because you can't. It's hard to misplay Wormcoil. Big creature does what it does. So it's probably Relic of Progenitus.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
If not that, then it's Card Liberated is maybe the other option. Maybe it is Card Liberated. That's a card where if there's no board, you kill land. Okay, that's pretty straightforward, especially if it can't get bolted. If there is a threat bolt, maybe you plus first. But when you're playing against, and I feel like a lot of my scenarios of complicated situations are when you're playing against Burn, because against Burn things are just can be over so quickly. Like your opponent has a Goblin Guide on the board, a Rift Bolt suspended, 2 land, and 2 cards, and you play Karn Liberated on 3, and you're at 10. Well, any option there is like debatable. You can kill the Goblin Guide plus for taking a card of their hand. Like it's not, and those are because the reason I think of that is because those are the scenarios where even now when I'm playing, I struggle with that.
So it's like the most skill intensive card in the deck might be Karn.
Yeah, it probably is. It's one where the like once with Relic and Oblivion Stone, the other examples I brought up, like once you're aware of them, you can make the right choices.
Right.
With Karn Liberated, you can have all the experience you want, and it doesn't mean you're going to know the right answer in a scenario, because it's not a matter of knowing the tricks. You know all the tricks, and it's still hard. So yeah, it's probably Karn Liberated.
Just want to talk a little bit about Expedition Map, at least from my perspective. I can't tell if my opponents are playing with it correctly. Let's say you have Expedition Map and you have 2 Urza's Mines in play. Do you crack the map to just use up your mana, or would you prefer to wait for yourself to draw a power plant or a tower in order to make a better decision of what to search for? Because I feel I see this scenario from Tron players a lot, and I can't tell if they are just using their mana efficiently or they are just prematurely searching.
Yeah, you're right that is something that comes up, and it's not going to be the same answer every single time.
Okay.
And a lot of, just because for anyone that's experienced with Tron, you've at this point played a lot more without London Mulligan than with it. And without London Mulligan, I would say there was much more of the mindset, do the best get the most Tron lands you can and hope you draw the other one, even on your opening hand.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I had 2 Tron pieces and a star, I'd probably keep that every single time on 7 2 years ago. Now I wouldn't keep that. And so it's the same kind of thing where because you just hope. Well, now am I hoping if I do a search a second Tron piece and hope to find the third one? I don't think so because the mindset is different than it used to be. Now we're not hoping, we want to make sure. And I mean, sure, it depends on how much pressure you're under. I think what's going to happen a decent amount of time is if you have you have your 2 mines in play map, and if you have, you'll give yourself the draw step. So instead of doing it at the end of the opponent's turn, you'll untap, draw, see if it's one of the other 2. If it's not, then you probably break anyway, so you don't miss your land drop.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think that's a good example that you had, and I think that's one where there's not going to be something that we can say that it's going to solve all the issues, because there's other factors: how fast is your opponent's stack, what's going, how likely are lands to get blown up. So there's not going to be an answer that's always right.
Okay.
But in general, I'm probably like so many things can impact. Like if you have Karn Great Creator in your hand, well then you're definitely not going to waste your land drop, because so you probably wait, don't hit one of them, search main phase, play your 3rd land, because then any 4th land allows you to play Great Creator.
Great example.
If you don't have Great Creator in your hand, if your hand is like, let's say your hand is Warm Coil and 2 Karns, and you're playing against a slower deck, then maybe you sit on it and you just pass the turn again and hope to draw one or the other, because you're not under intense pressure, and hitting your land drop matters less when getting to 3 or 4 mana still doesn't help you.
Right.
Yeah, so that's definitely one. I wouldn't have thought of that as an example of a tricky play, but it is something that comes up. You're right, and it is. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, it happens enough. I mean, it's not always mine either. It's like Forest Mine. Any combination. You only have 1 Tron land in play, but you got that map.
Yeah.
What do you do with it? How to best utilize it?
Yeah, no, it definitely happens. And there's not a universal answer, I don't think.
So I guess you need to just play something out. Turn 4, just go get the land. If you have something much bigger, take your time.
Yeah, I think so. And then also, do you need to get lucky to win? Like, if you need to get lucky, then go ahead and search for one. But if you can win, if you eventually win anyways, then yeah, maybe you take it slower.
Gotcha. What kind of player do you think this deck is for, Tron?
I mean, if you're Tron is going to, I mean, the first few turns of every game from your perspective are going to be the same.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be okay, because Tron, like turn 1 and 2 are incredibly repetitive. They're always the same.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You're assembling your mana. From then on, the game is very fun, and from your side it seems interactive, although not always from the side. But I feel like Tron, you don't get to make. Another reason why people think Tron is a simple deck is because you don't make as many decisions.
Mm-hmm.
They matter a lot, but you don't get to make as many decisions quantity wise. And if you're okay with making fewer but more sizable decisions, then yeah, sure. Then that's, I would say that would be a drawing point to the deck for that kind of player. Also for a newer player to Magic, not to Tron, but to Magic, I would say it's not a bad deck to try and get familiar with, because it's a deck where you'll see improvement.
Mm-hmm.
The mechanics of Tron are in assembling like mulligans and then assembling Tron are the same thing happens every game. It may play out in lots of different ways, but you have the same goal.
Yep.
And you'll be able to see yourself with your sequencing as it improves. Like you should see like notable improvements over not a great amount of time. And it's nice when you're newer, I think, to have the reinforcement of I can tell I'm getting better. Because with some other there are definitely going to be other decks or other scenarios where you can't tell if you're getting better because you're still losing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But with Tron, as you start to see yourself getting to Tron on turn 3 or 4 more and more often, it's like whatever your opponent's doing, you can see yourself getting better in how you're developing your deck. And so I like that. There's the kind of, as you get familiar with it, you'll be able to tell.
Right.
Also, another reason why it can be good for newer players is some of the threats, like Wormcoil Engine, Thragtusk.
It's ridiculously powerful.
You're not likely, like once you get to Tron and play Wormcoil against Burn, well, things are looking good.
Yeah.
Now there's still
Burn players do not like Wormcoil.
Yeah, I mean, there's still multitudes of ways that you can lose and mess up, but I do think it's decent as just a way to demonstrate, to learn how to proceed through turns, because it's consistent and because you have the same goal, so it's an easy thing to try and achieve. As far as what else would draw someone to the deck, I mean, I think it's a deck where you have to pay attention. You only have so many cards to maneuver with. Like in the main deck, you may have I generally think the number is 6. You have 6 cards in the main deck that you can mess around with, and you have like 54 that are basically locked in for the most part. And so for some people are going to find that unappealing, but I have had no problem. I've got plenty of enjoyment of just trying to get those 6 cards exactly right. Like how many Oblivion Stones, how many Relics, how many Dismembers. Getting those numbers right based on what the field looks like in a given, set environment, I find that entertaining. And so, yeah, and same with the sideboard. You have not a lot of slots to work. You have to find the best way to take advantage of your 6 main deck slots, 6 sideboard cards. If that's something that is appealing, then I think it's a good deck for that.
It is, and you never know when something like Karn the Great Creator gets printed and changes almost everything.
Yeah, well, sure, yeah. I mean, I don't even know what would have to happen for like a new card to be printed where it's like, oh, well, this card's definitely going in Tron, because we're already so stacked with great stuff.
Right.
But
even though you're stacked with great stuff, Tron is hurting right now. So we talked earlier about how Tron's showing like no presence now. Is it maybe partially because of Eldrazi Tron stealing Thunder, or is it just basically the hate cards that are preventing Tron from getting off the ground?
I think it's because of the hate cards. So I actually think Eldrazi Tron is a good matchup for Classic Tron.
Yeah, it is.
I think it always has been. So no, I think it's really the hate cards. It's the rest of the environment. I mean, Amulet's a very strong deck. That doesn't help. Damping Spheres being 3 copies of them all over the format. Collector Roofs, Field of Ruins, all that stuff collectively is bad news. And yet Tron has been fighting through that for years. We just finally tipped over to the point where there was too much, I guess.
Okay.
But it doesn't take too much for it to swing back. And like we talked about earlier, that may all.
Yeah, just metagame wise, are there any particular like cards Tron might be looking forward to getting banned to help push the metagame in their favor? Like Oko has a gigantic target on its head. What if
Yeah.
Oko gets banned? Could that be enough to put Tron back into position?
I mean, it would help just because it would reduce the overall power level of the format,
Mm-hmm.
and anything being banned when it's not in your deck means your deck is a little to be, I
Sure.
suppose. But I'm not entirely sure how things would have to go. I think Urza, I think the card Urza is not bad for Tron.
Mm-hmm.
It's but those decks all have Okos in them, which and Damping Spheres on the board, which are problematic. Aside from like the reality of Modern right now, we don't have kind of the element. Some of the elements in the past have made Tron bad. Infect is not popular. Burn used to be a problem. I don't think it currently is that bad of a matchup. I think it's closer to even, but Burn isn't popular. Infect isn't popular. Gloria's Vengeance is not popular. Ad Nauseam is
It's dead.
a scary matchup. Not popular. Oh, that changed when Great Krieger got printed anyway, but there aren't. It doesn't look like. I mean, Tron's not unique, but certainly unusual in the case that, or in the reality that when you're looking at the metagame for whether Tron's going to be good, you almost don't have to look at the main decks. You just have to look at the sideboards.
Okay.
It's like a graveyard. It's like Dredge, and Dredge can probably look at the environment, and you can show all the main decks, and Dredge players are good here. They're not going to know that because it's going to matter on Rest in Peace, Relics, Surgical, that kind of thing. And so for Tron, it's really going to be Damping Sphere, Fulminator Mage, that kind of stuff. And I think we've been in a world where things looked very bad, and I think we're starting now to transition into a spot where things are a little sunnier, and so there aren't main decks, I think, that are just objectively terrible for Tron. So as things sway back, I wouldn't be surprised to start seeing it pop up again.
Tron definitely needs a champion, and I definitely think that you're definitely one of them. I was very impressed with your results over the years, especially in the face of like a lot of like pro players that will be playtesting for Modern, and they just openly say, well, Tron's unplayable, Tron sucks. And then you just top 8 or go deep in some GP, proving that, Tron is still has what it takes to adapt to Modern.
I mean, I think for a long time it did. There was still, like, I mean, other people could have had these results too, I think. But it requires a certain, you have to put in the time, because some of the interactions aren't obvious. And the hard decisions that, it's hard to just learn the mulligan decisions and the sideboarding decisions from somebody else. You need, I think, I mean, this probably a lot of things I said, I feel like apply to any deck or just Magic in general, but
sure,
for myself, I do so much better when I know why the cards are in the deck, like why the sideboard cards are the way they are, why this opening hand isn't good enough. And so, yeah, I mean, if you put in the time, if in the past, if you put in the time and really knew what you were doing, I think you do well with Tron. I think it's always a deck. And I think in the future, it looks like we might be heading back there, where but you have to, it's not easy. Like the game ones with Tron, especially when you win the roll, there are, but cyborg games are not easy. There are, as in Modern, a non-rotating format, just over time, there's more and more bigger variety of cards that disrupt your mana. And you have to be able to deal with all of them, whatever somebody might have. And so it just takes practice. It takes time to get used to that. And learning. An
example of mastery, really.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I've I have put in as much time with the deck as probably as anyone else has in the last couple of years, and I feel rewarded for the time that I put in. I qualified for 2 Pro Tours with the deck, and yeah, that's out of quite a decent number of attempts, but But I feel like I'm definitely satisfied with what I got out of it, given what I put in.
Excellent. Beautiful. Spoken like a true master. So if anyone wants to go deeper with you about Tron or contact you in any way, where can they find you?
I mean, I'm on Twitter. It's Oarsman79. This year I'm going to be doing, I think, almost monthly. I'll be doing commentary for the Rage series out in Chicago. So if you're in that area, or if you're watching their broadcasts and the chat there, that's a way you can get in touch with me. Yeah, and they have their series. They've been at it for about 4 years now, and they're steadily growing each year. This year is the first year they're having 2-day, 2 weekend events. They're not 2-day events; they're 2 1-day events. But and I'm going to be out there about 8 or 10 times this year doing commentary for them. So yeah, if you're in that area, you can certainly approach me in person there or in the chat of their commentary. But yeah, on Twitter is a good way. I definitely see that stuff.
Sweet. That's excellent. So I'm going to thank you again very much, Joe, for coming on, letting hey, if you got value out of this video, don't forget to give a like. This was an incredibly valuable video. This might be like, I don't know, the foundation for anybody who wants to get into Tron and know how Tron works in Modern. And certainly, like you said, at the time that we're doing this interview, Tron is sort of at a low point, but it's been very powerful and playable for years. And make no mistake, Tron is going to be coming back sometime in the near future. So I'd like to thank you once again, Joe, for coming on and doing this interview with me. So anyway, this has been Nikachu, Merfolk Master, here with Tron Master Joe Lossett, talking about modern Tron in Modern.